Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rising Stories podcast. I'm Corrine Sandifer, your host. Rising Stories features women who are working and living their dreams and passions. Sometimes we interview an author, sometimes we interview an activist or speaker, sometimes we have guests who run their own businesses and companies, and sometimes we just interview someone who is an influential person in their world. But we always have wonderful best business practice tips. We have productivity ideas and tips, and we also talk about our favorite apps and so much more. So grab your favorite beverage and listen to these amazing women tell their stories. Today on the show, we have Joanne Lipman. She is a former editor-in-chief of USA Today and author of That's What She Said, What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together. Joanne and I talk about these discussions that we all need to be having with the men that we work with. Conversations that need to take place about how we as women can move into a better place of equality. It was a great chat filled with lots of great advice and insights from this fabulous leader. Joanne and I also talked about her book club, her best business advice that she got from her former boss, and we even talk about her favorite seasonal snack. But before we get started, I would love it if you would take a few minutes to subscribe to the show on iTunes or on YouTube. I am so excited, and it's so much fun that Rising Stories is on YouTube, and it's just the audio. This allows people from all over the world who don't have access to iTunes or Stitcher or any apps to listen to the podcast. So I'm super excited about that. I would also love it if you would follow me on Instagram. On Instagram, every Sunday, I post my productivity tips to get you started on the right track for the week. So join me. I'm at Corrine Sandifer. And as always, if you hear something on this show, no need to jot it down. Don't have an accident if you're listening to it on while you're driving. It will be on the show notes at CorrineSandifer.com. So if you want to purchase a book that we mentioned on the show or some type of product, please do so by using the links in the description below. This helps support Rising Stories podcast. So here is my conversation with Joanne Lipman. Hi, Joanne.
Hi, good to be here.
Thanks for coming on Rising Stories. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I just recently saw you and met you at in Palo Alto at the Lean In conference for leaders across the globe. It was such an exciting time.
Yeah, that was a fantastic conference, and it was so good to meet you in person, too.
Yes. All the speakers were amazing, and you were one of them, and you are the author of a book titled That's What She Said, What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together. And I love the title. And I haven't gotten all the way through, but I do love everything you're talking about. And you know, it's such a crazy world right now, right? I mean, there's just so much going on with the Me Too movement, and now we're post Dr. Ford and Kavanaugh and all that. And it's just, I think there's so much going on within the workplace. Have you noticed any difference, or are people calling you asking for more, for more information, more advice?
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So I actually began working on the book more than 3 years ago. And the reason I wrote the book is because I've been an editor for a long time, an editor-in-chief. So I've worked in my career, first at the Wall Street Journal, then Condé Nast, and then Gannett, USA Today. And I've worked in my career primarily with men. And my sources were primarily men. My mentors were men. And I had a very good experience working in a man's world. But at the same time, I could tell when women got together, when we talk amongst ourselves, we talk about the issues that are very universal, both across the country, across industries, and globally. These issues of inequality that we just cannot seem to close that gender gap in terms of being marginalized, overlooked, interrupted, underpaid, and simply not taken as seriously as the guy sitting right next to us. And what really got me going was I started going to more leadership. I started being a part of more of these women's leadership conferences and meetings. And I realized that these conversations we are having with one another are terrific, but they are half solution, and we alone can only get to half a solution, and we really do need men to join us. Now, we have seen so many more complexities. When I started the book, this was pre-Me Too and certainly Kavanaugh, and we see that the gender issues have gotten that much more complex. On the flip side, on the plus side, what I do see is more and more men who are stepping up, who are reading the book, who are inviting me in to speak at male-dominated organizations to say, look, we want to be part of the solution. We're not sure how to do that. Can you help us?
I love that. I'm so excited for that because I think you're right. It's, we can talk amongst ourselves and we can solve the problem amongst ourselves, but it doesn't solve the problem. We have to include them in the conversation. Most men, I think there are a few bad apples in every company and in every workplace, but I think for the most part, they're wanting to be better, be part of the solution, and find ways to make us feel what we deserve is just equality.
Right, just equal opportunity, right? So, and you're right. There are, look, in almost every organization, you may have a few apples. And frankly, as someone put it to me, they said, there's probably like 20% of guys who are basically troglodytes, who don't care, who are never going to be converts into like trying to go for a more equitable world. And then you've got maybe 20% who are just true believers who are with us all the way. But that leaves all that vast number of guys in the middle, the vast majority of men who, of course they want an equal world, but they're just not sure what to do about it, what role they have to play. And in fact, I just came from speaking in San Francisco at a tech firm, and one of the men there who had invited me told me, when he read the book, what he realized was that he had a role to play. And he said, it was always somebody else's job to figure out that whole gender equality thing. He never thought of that as something that was his personal responsibility, and reading the book changed his mind and made him realize, there's things that he can do and he needs to own this. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, bringing it down to a personal, what can I do level, I think is key. And it's the small things I feel like will be big things in women's lives.
And it is. And so much of this has to do with awareness. I mean, the fact that, women are interrupted 3 times more frequently than men are, but men aren't aware of it because they're not focused on it. Women in a meeting, their voices are literally not heard when they make up less than half a meeting, particularly if they're like 30% or less of a meeting. They literally, every woman has had that experience where you say something and nobody seems to hear it. And then 2 minutes later, a guy repeats exactly what you just said, and everybody turns to him and they're like, hey, Bob, great idea. And you're scratching your head saying, wait a second, I just said that. But it is true that when women are in the minority, their voices aren't heard. But these are things that once we become aware of them, we can actually take steps, very practical, pretty simple steps to counteract those kinds of issues.
Absolutely. Let's say that situation happens where you're being interrupted. What is a woman to do in that situation? What do you recommend?
So the first thing is we have to understand this is not always on the woman's head. Managers need to be aware of the issues, which is why I wrote the book for men as well as for women. So I actually met executives who have created no interruptions rules in meetings, which is if you are pitching an idea, whether you are male or female, you must be allowed to finish. And he created this rule. It was actually a television producer who created this rule because he found that he had a writer's room, a dozen men sitting around a table, only 2 of them were women, and the women's ideas were not being heard, and none of their ideas were being adopted. And he realized that it was because every time they tried to pitch an idea, their male colleagues interrupted them. And as he said to me, it took him a long time to figure out the dynamic. His ear, as he said, my ear was attuned to the male interrupting voice. It was not attuned to the female voice, the minority voice in the room. So he had to train himself. And that is part of it. Like I said, awareness goes a very, very long way. The other really important thing for women is allyship. And your ally can be male or female. Your ally can be a supervisor or a peer, but it needs to be somebody who's going to have your back. Too many times women think that when something's happening to them, when they're not being heard, they're not getting credit for their work, they're being overlooked, they think or if they feel like they're being abused, frankly, they feel it is their personal problem and it is their mountain to climb and they have to figure out how to fix it themselves. When in fact, what we really need are allies, either male or female, who back us up. So there's a wonderful strategy that the women of the Obama administration coined called amplification, which is the idea that if you and I are in a meeting together and you have a great idea, I immediately repeat your idea and credit you by name so that we make sure everybody hears that idea and we make sure that everybody knows it was your idea. Mm-hmm. So when Bob tries to take credit for it 2 minutes later, we still know it was your idea.
Right. And hopefully Bob won't say anything. He'll be in agreement.
But, yes.
Yes.
Or he'll be in agreement. I mean, and the other thing is really, I think these allies, this is not, the time to do this is not when you're in the middle of the meeting. And I think that this is an issue a lot of us run into. It happens to us in a meeting and we're like, okay, what do I say right here and now? And yes, you can say something like, hello, that was my idea. I mentioned it 2 minutes ago. Certainly we can do that. But I think that there's a much, a more strategic, longer term solution to that, which is to have those allies in the meeting who are going to stand up for you.
Mm-hmm. I think when I talk to women in the workplace and we have conversations like this, I think we are just so taken by surprise in the moment of that something has happened like that we have either been interrupted or not given credit for something, or just when things happen that are, not giving us the credit, not giving us what we're worth and being in an equal playing field. It's just, we're just taken by such surprise. And I feel like what you're saying is be strategic and let's talk about the before, what if, how can we, bring awareness and how can we be prepared for when that happens.
Be prepared. And by the way, every one of these things that I talk about in That's What She Said, I've experienced multiple times. I can't even tell you the number of times I came across a piece of research that I cite in the book that I just said to myself, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person who had that problem. But no, it's actually something very common. It has been documented for all women. And I've learned this the hard way. I mean, I was really reminded of a particular situation where I was the supervisor and I had a very disruptive person in the meeting, a man who simply would not respect my authority. He was constantly cutting me down, and he was someone who reported to me. And I tried every which way. I just thought of it as my problem. And finally, someone else in my group came to me and said, hey, that person who is being so awful to you in the meeting is shutting down conversation for the rest of us. We're all afraid to talk. And I was so focused on being my problem that I didn't realize that actually was a whole group dynamic. I mean, it was really toxic for the entire department. It wasn't just my problem. It became a toxic issue for the whole department. And so I learned that the hard way. But the research also bears that out, that there are certain men and women too, but certain men who simply cannot abide by a woman in a supervisory position. There's actually a sociological term for that women in power are often seen as what's called an illegitimate authority. And an illegitimate authority means you don't have to listen to them, right? And so women, there's a lot of issues that we deal with when we become supervisors and bosses that are very, unfortunately, common to women that men do not experience when they are in the same position.
What are some things that you want to see change this year?
So, one of the things that my ideal goal is something that I actually saw in Iceland, which is the #1 country in the world for gender equality. So I went there to experience it. And what I noticed in Iceland, which by the way is an incredibly macho country full of fishermen and farmers and people who love their heritage,
right.
And there's axes in every gift shop. But when you sit down with those fishermen and farmers, those men, they will declare themselves to be feminists in a way that you realize there's no politicization attached to it. It is not a political phrase. It is basically like saying, I am a human being. And that the ideal for me is to take the politics out of gender equality, and it has become highly politicized, and most recently more politicized than ever around the Supreme Court hearings, where basically, there was a poll done that found that the majority of Republicans felt that the Me Too movement had gone too far, and the vast majority of Democrats disagreed with that. So it had suddenly became a political litmus test instead of what it started out as and what it needs to be, which is a movement about all women and the rights of all women. It is not about what political party you belong to. It is all about women and equality, which should not be politicized. That is simply that. So that's the dream, is to get to the position where, like Iceland, it is common sense as opposed to politicized. Specifically, there's a few things I would love to see. I would like to see more companies adopt gender wage gap analyses, which is something that I think, we've been talking about the gender wage gap since 1963, and we still haven't remotely closed it. So I do think that talking about it is not enough. What we really need to do are these gender wage gap analyses that are the law now in the UK, and that we see some companies are doing this in the US, like Salesforce. And it really does show you, when you line up apples to apples, what people's jobs are. You really understand what's happening. I'd like to see diversity become incentivized within companies in a way that's not. Right now, for example, a lot of companies are saying we value diversity, but while they have metrics for everything else, they have very specific targeted goals for revenue, for profit, for sales, for volume, for everything, but they don't have specific targets for diversity. And if you don't put a number on it, it's very hard to quantify it and then to achieve it. And one of the things that I see some companies doing is actually building it into compensation. So it's if you're a bonus eligible employee, part of your bonus is dependent on how successful are you at hiring, training, promoting, and retaining diverse talent. I think there are some very specific things. I actually just ran into a company, and I'd love to see this spread. This is my new favorite thing. Mandatory paternity leave.
Oh, yes.
So the idea, I just wrote about this for the Wall Street Journal. The idea is more companies are offering family leave to both men and women, and more companies are offering paid family leave to both genders. And yet men are not taking it. Even men who want to take it are getting that kind of wink from their supervisors that says, yeah, you don't want to do that. It's going to hurt your career. So men don't take it, women do. Men are told it's going to hurt their careers. That message is not lost on women who do take leave. And so this one particular company in Boston now requires men to take paternity leave. And the CEO told me it's exactly for that reason. We want to level the playing field for men and women. And so men have to take it as well as women. And of course, it's great for families and it's great for everybody. But you have to force the men to do it.
I think that's a good message for them to do that across the board so that they can see that, it feels like you're penalizing women for taking it, even though it's their right and it's everyone's right. That's terrible. I'm glad that company's doing that. Mandatory. It should be everywhere. Exactly. I don't understand. Why wouldn't they want to take it? But I get it if they're given that, impression that, oh, you don't want to do that. And there's just so much more different pressures for them as well. But it's sending a bad message to us who need to take it. We're the ones, having the children we need. It needs to be on equal playing ground there. Absolutely. Joanne, I would love to hear maybe a story about what got you into the work that you have done and are doing in journalism. When you were young, did you always know you would be in journalism and reporting and editing and...
Yeah, I think I knew I wanted to be a journalist before I knew what journalism was, because I give all credit to Louis, author of Harriet the Spy, which I read when I was 7 and then read about at least a dozen times after that. So Harriet the Spy, for those who haven't read it, but everyone should, was an 11-year-old girl, I think she was 11, who's a spy, and she spies on all her neighbors, and she writes down everything they say in this little composition notebook. And so when I was 7, barely had just learned how to write, made my mother buy me one of those little composition notebooks, and I spied on my sisters, and I spied on my neighbors and my Hebrew school teacher. But I wrote everything down, and then I realized, so I thought I wanted to be a spy, and then I realized you could actually make a career out of this, and it was called journalism. And so from a very, very young age, I was interested in journalism in some form. I wasn't sure exactly what form that would be. And I always loved to write. So it became a natural for me. And then my father, who was a businessman, from before I was born, every day the Wall Street Journal landed on our driveway, and I never picked it up ever until when I was 18. I had an internship at a magazine. I lived in New Jersey with my parents and had an internship at a magazine in New York, and I started commuting to New York every day that summer with my dad and picked up his Wall Street Journal and fell in love because the writing on that front page was magnificent. It was fantastic writing. And so I set my sights on the Wall Street Journal and ended up getting an internship there when I was a junior in college. And then they hired me. So I started at the Wall Street Journal as soon as I graduated from college and spent 22 years there.
Nice.
So I went from intern to reporter to page 1 editor, and then I created Weekend Journal and Personal Journal and became the deputy managing editor. That's the number 2 editor slot there. And had a fabulous experience there. But that's also where I, learned to kind of live and work in a world really primarily surrounded by men. By the time I left, a third of the editors were female, which was really great.
That's great.
But when I started, there wasn't even a ladies' room in the newsroom. There was only a ladies' room, this tiny little guest ladies' room near the receptionist.
So, oh, wow.
Yeah. So I got to see
the changes.
The real changes.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What would you say is your best business advice?
So I think the best business advice when I was this goes back more than 20 years when I was still at the Wall Street Journal. I was on page 1 as an editor, and my boss, a guy named John Brecher, I once asked him, he was the boss of page 1. He decided what stories were worthy of page 1 and which ones were not. And I remember one day there were 2 options, and he chose one, and I was thinking I would have chosen the other. So I said to him, why did you choose this one story, not the other story? And he said, and this is the great advice, he said, the most important thing is to make the decision. Make a decision. He said the worst thing you can do is be wishy-washy and say maybe this, maybe the other, maybe this, And he's right. He's right. No, and I think that's so important for leadership, that you have to have a really clear vision and you have to be able to make a decision. Because and of course you have to acknowledge if you make a wrong decision, and you have to be man enough to reverse course if you've made the wrong decision. But his point was leadership requires, to lead, you have to be able to set a strategy, set a course, and lead the way there.
I love that. I love that bit of advice, because so many times either the opportunity is lost or we end up just continuing to second guess our decisions. Just make the decision and let the chips fall. And then, of course, like you said, if you've made a bad decision, then you take care of that. But yeah, I love that advice. I think that's really good.
And it also helped in that, as he said to me, like, someone else might have chosen the page one. That's okay too. You would have made the decision. Right. So I thought that was, he said the worst thing would be to dither. I don't know, this one and that one, maybe this one. No, maybe that one. Right. That would be the worst possible way to go.
Yeah. I love that. So what's your favorite app? Do you have an app that you're always going to on your phone?
So, I certainly use all of the communications and social media apps. My latest favorite app is simply the podcast app. I'm on book tour, so I'm traveling a lot. And so I'm constantly discovering new podcasts.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite podcast? Besides mine, besides Rising Stories? What's yours?
I would say the one that I'm hooked on certainly is The Daily from the New York Times,
yes,
which I find pretty much essential.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have been listening recently to The Hidden Brain, which I think is phenomenal.
Oh, I have not heard of that one, The Hidden Brain.
The Hidden Brain, it's I think it's an NPR podcast and basically looks at why certain things happen that, what like alternate reasons for why we see things. There's the current episode looks at why the unemployment rate is so low and there are so many jobs open, and yet why are so many men saying that they're out of the workforce and they can't find jobs? And it turns out because a lot of the openings are in work that is considered women's work, like home health aides. And why is it that men are threatened about going into jobs like that?
Interesting.
It's happening.
Yeah. Interesting. Are you a reader? Do you read or listen to audiobooks?
Oh, yeah, I'm a big reader. Yes. Yeah. Again, travel.
Yes. What are you reading currently?
So I'm in a book group. I am in a book group with the mothers of my daughter's kindergarten class. Mm-hmm. Those kindergartners are currently 28 years old.
Oh, wow.
So we've been together a long time. And it was my choice this month. So I have chosen a double feature. And it is that new book called Meg, Jo, Amy, Beth, about the resonance of, it's a nonfiction assessment of why Little Women matters. It's sort of an academic book on why Little Women still has relevance today. And we're reading that in conjunction with rereading Little Women.
Oh, nice. So reading Little Women and then reading that almost a commentary type.
Yeah. I'll tell you the name of it. It's a brand new book. Oh, here it is. Meg, Jo, Beth, Amy, and the story of Little Women and why it still matters.
And putting that on my list. That looks good.
Yes. So we're reading, that's the book that we're currently reading. It's a nonfiction book. I tend to read more nonfiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I travel a lot, and also the last few years I've been working in Tyson's while living in New York City. I tend to read like the big presidential biographies, the Doris Kearns Goodwin books, the Hamilton, the mega biographies.
Yeah, those sound really good. I'm gonna have to put those on my list as well. Yeah, I love the Little Women, and there's like a movie out, and then there's also a series on either Netflix or Amazon Prime, and I just feel like it's all, and of course the original film, but I feel like it's making a big comeback.
I think that in this day and age, there's renewed interest in the role of women in society. And so Meg, Jo, Beth, Amy, the nonfiction book is sort of a look that helps put the book into historical context. And similarly, I actually just before this reread A Handmaid's Tale, the Margaret Atwood book. Again, I had read it, years ago, and just reread it and realized the resonance it has now is just chilling. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of these books that that really are struggling to kind of understand where we are with gender dynamics.
Yeah. Well, last question is, what 3 things you are absolutely loving these days? And it can be anything from food to the last thing you ordered on Amazon, something that you had to text your girlfriends about.
Okay, so let me think about that. Of course, the 3 people would be my husband and 2 children.
Yeah.
So that would be my top 3. And my family, absolutely.
Are you eating something that you're like?
It's a hard one. No, my favorite foods are the perennials, chocolate, pizza.
Yes. Oh, I love pizza. Now, do you like the thin crust or a deep dish?
I am a thin crust person.
Thin crust.
Oh, right now, okay, right this very moment, it has just turned into Malamar's season. So
Malamar's?
Malamar's.
What are Malamar's?
Malamar's. It is a cookie they only make in Malamar. You're down south, right?
Yes.
Are you in the south?
We are in deep south Nashville. They don't have them. Is it like a candy?
No, it's a cookie. It's Mallomars. Okay, so it is a cookie that they actually only make in the colder months because it's sort of like a s'more. It's got it's like marshmallow and graham cracker coated in dark chocolate. And I think they only make it in the winter because of the chocolate will melt. And so there's a Malamar season. So the Malamar season just started.
Yum. That sounds really good.
Yes. Okay. So then the other thing that I'm obsessed with right now are home design magazines because I'm renovating a house. So
the whole house or just a few rooms? Are you renovating the whole
half
house?
a house?
Half
Kitchen,
a house.
dining room, for the house.
The main things.
Everything but the bedrooms.
Yeah, the main things. Really. I mean, when you say you're doing the kitchen and the bathrooms, that's pretty much the whole house because the other stuff is just walls.
And dining room yes. So it's pretty much a whole house renovation. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you're looking through for ideas and things. Yeah.
Yep.
Fun. Yep.
I gave you more than 3 things, but
that's awesome.
Take your pick.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Joanne, for coming on. I really enjoyed talking with you, and I am excited to finish reading your book. I think everyone should get it, and men and women, wherever you are, this is a great book to read and to put into practice. Easy to put into practice, and such an impact it can make to our society in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Thanks for a great conversation.
I could have talked with her for hours. She is such a strong woman who just oozes out confidence and encouragement for women. I loved chatting with her today. You must go out and get a copy of her book. I'll have the link below. And the book is called That's What She Said, What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together. You can also follow her on Instagram. And make sure that you give this podcast a shout out. I would love for more women to hear Joanne and learn about what she has to say about women in the workplace and how we need to talk with men. Also, join us next week for Friday Favorites. And in 2 weeks, I will be interviewing Rosie Roca. She is VP of Salesforce. Another wonderful, super powerful lady who had a great interview with me. I just loved talking with her, and I know that you will get so much out of it. So make sure that you are subscribed so you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks so much for listening. Please tell your friends, follow me on Instagram, and keep rising in your story.